We talk a lot about shame here. Nobody feels like they're reading enough, at least if they're the kind of person who has an idea about what enough is. And even among those who read all the time, most categories don't seem to really count. Genre fiction is unserious, fan fiction isn't the genuine article, audiobooks are somebody else reading to you, ebooks lack a certain something, and comics are for kids. If it isn't Moby-Dick, Finnegan's Wake, War and Peace, or at least fairly unpleasant, we'll find a way to tell ourselves we haven't really had our vegetables. I wouldn't argue that an audiobook is exactly the same as something printed, but I don't think that makes it worthless. I also wouldn't pretend that most visual novels I've played are well written or even half decent, but it's a fascinating form. For the past couple months, Tracy and I have spent dozens of hours per week playing and reading a visual novel about defending an evil school against waves of alien invaders. It's possible that if we hadn't done that, we might have devoted the same time to reading great works of fiction as printed in physical books, but I honestly doubt it. Our game has been crowding out other games, TV shows, moderately challenging movies, and podcasts. Even if we take for granted that reading high art is always preferable to reading text boxes in video games, I suspect the text boxes are better for us than most of the alternatives. Anyway, it's tedious to worry all the time about doing or reading what's best. You have to love your life at some point. This week, Tracy and I discussed the game that we've been playing and how it exemplifies a strange, deeply compromised, and frequently absorbing form. I've put visual novel recommendations in the show notes for those who would like to dip their toes in the water. After that conversation concludes, there will be a brief musical break, and then we'll loop back in time for discussion of the books we've been reading, our respective religious upbringings, my depressing Moby-Dick story, and the way that lovers talk. You can look at the show notes for a list of all the books mentioned therein. This is Library Pizza, a podcast about reading. I'll see you on the other side of my very dignified theme music. Now we can begin the podcast. It might be starting now.
What's sad is I feel like we had a better in with Moby-Dick and sort of long, interminable things that nonetheless you value reading all the way through.
And why do you say that? How does that connect with our planned subject for this conversation?
Well, I know we were going to talk a little bit about visual novels because we've been playing the 100-line : Last Defense Academy.
Yep.
Which is a visual novel, which is a video game that you read. It has branching endings, decision trees, so that, occasionally you'll make a decision and you'll get pushed into another section of narrative that's completely different from what you would have gotten on the other branch. And I think there are at least 100 endings, possibly more.
I believe there are 100 flat, which is a classic example of I always think it's a real warning sign when your plan for an ambitious project like this involves a round number with no significance.
Yeah.
Because you've set a goal for yourself without any kind of rationale to support the particular choice that you've made, and now because 100 is a big number, you're in hell. So the history behind this one, Tracy knows this, but for the listener, the 100-line : Last Defense Academy is a visual novel made by a company, Too-Kyo Games, that was started by Kazutaka Kodaka, who created the Danganronpa series of visual novels, and Kotaro Uchi Koshi. These are the hardest Japanese names I've ever encountered.
I will say, I have been guilty as we've been playing the game of being like, these are not real names. They are just combining. They're combining syllables. Nobody is named Kyoshika Magadori. And now I'm thinking actually, maybe they need to be seen. Maybe
they're sharing
for
their pain.
difficult names. Yeah,
they're like, this is not all of us are named, Abe or Hero.
Okada and
Some of us have really difficult, complicated names, and we need to be represented in our art. But Kotaro Uchikoshi created the Zero Escape series of games. And the significance of that is these are basically like choose your own adventure books that have been made into video games with like a basic amount of supporting graphics. Like usually you've got characters, in this case, they'll be in the anime style, and they're just like standing motionless in front of kind of evocative backgrounds at varying levels of detail. And they'll have a few different versions of the characters, the drawings of them with like different moods and actions to help you visualize the actual narrative a little bit. But by and large, you're having to do a lot of theater of the mind to fill in the gaps. And the Zero Escape series is really focused on time travel and sort of nonlinear problem solving. So the structure is generally like you pursue the story until you get to a certain point where the characters are kind of flummoxed or they're killed in a weird way or something. And then you try an alternate series of choices. And eventually you learn enough through doing the different timelines that you can go back and solve some of the earliest problems and get through to what is considered the true ending, right? So it ends up being ultimately like it's an apparently extremely nonlinear story. And then in practice, it's actually like pretty much point A to point B, but in a way that you wouldn't really be able to visualize in advance of having done it.
Right. You just need to go gather some additional information from, say, another timeline to fill in the gaps that would get you, past the locked door or through the safe or let you know who did the murder so you can stop them or whatever.
Yeah, or this guy's a robot, and I know that now because of this timeline. So I'm going to use that information in the other timeline where it's going to be useful for me to have known that he was a robot. So those games are like really ambitious in their structure, right? They usually do have like 16, 30 endings or whatever. They've got a lot of different like intersecting stories that you like. Basically, the only way to create these stories would be with a big, complicated spreadsheet.
Right.
And so that guy and the guy behind Danganronpa, which is another visual novel series we'll talk about in a second, they get together. They're making their studio where they're going to be making games together with their superpowers. They're kind of like the guys in visual novels.
Yeah.
The tastemakers.
No, when people heard this was coming out, it was like, I wish I could think of any relevant comparison. But it was, if you liked Danganronpa, then odds were 90 to 95% you also really loved Zero Escape and vice versa. Like, so people are like, well, now they're getting together. This is like a super group. Right.
This is very generational. This tells you my exact age, maybe down to the month. My first thought was Wolf Parade. This is like Wolf Parade.
Yeah.
Which is not even the indie super group that one should do if one is going to go at that point of comparison. But so they got together when they were first making this. I read about this, and the guy who wrote Danganronpa was like, I want to have a game with 100 endings. I want you to be able to make any choice you want to, and you could essentially play forever. And whatever happens, you get to explore like whole different scenarios, and it's just like endlessly complicated and stuff. And the other guy looked at him and was like, you absolute lunatic.
Yeah.
We cannot. I am speaking to you as the person who almost ruined himself making big, complicated, nonlinear games. What you said is too stupid.
Yes, and what I'll say to sort of further contextualize this is Danganronpa does not have a super high variety of endings in general. Like, it's
got one.
Yeah, but there are sort of some choices you can make that have some, I feel like sometimes there's a small impact on the story for different choices, but yeah, there's one outcome.
Yeah.
So the guy who has never done this before is saying, let's have an infinite number of endings.
Yeah.
And the guy who has tried to do infinite endings, is saying,
look at this spreadsheet.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And he's correct. And I
he's right.
Yeah. Like, I'm on his side. Another quick aside, I taught a video game writing workshop for middle schoolers recently, and our first exercise was to do like a cave exploration text adventure. And right away, even though we had kind of talked about the dangers of creating too many endings, it was a cool object lesson in a way, because we were using twine, and you could just see immediately, like, it's great that they thought of these things, but they were saying, like, what if you go in, we started with 3 rooms, and they were like, what if you go into that room, but if you've already been to room 1 and you've done this certain thing with the chicken, then you have a sword that you can use to kill this guard, which will then make him drop the key that you need to get into the doorway in room 2. And so I was immediately this was happening.
Right.
And so I was able to show them in real time, like, okay, now you just created like 16 paths.
Yeah.
Just from that one, you thought it was kind of a simple decision, but it's already sprawling out of control.
Yeah, it's fractal.
Yeah. It's incredible how quickly it can multiply.
So Tracy and I have been playing this together. There's we don't know quite how long we've been playing, because we're playing on our Steam Deck, and
so
Steam
weird.
has this feature where it tells you how many hours, it keeps track of how many hours you've been playing a game. And really what it means is how many hours you've had the game open. And so I have a few of those for certain games that I just don't look at anymore, because seeing the 4 digits. I don't think I have any 5-digit hour counts, but I do have some 4-digit hour counts. And that, what I tell myself is that is partly from leaving it on overnight, or even over the course of an entire weekend or something when I was away. And that is true, but it doesn't really matter. That's like 8 out of 1,000 hours.
No, when it gets into like days, you start to really think about your time.
Yes, and that's why I had like a mini panic attack and stopped playing Fallout 4. But with this one, sometimes it tells us that we've been playing it for over 100 hours, and sometimes it's now like up at 150, and I don't know which answer is true, but they're both a little upsetting.
Because we're nowhere near the end.
No.
In no way are we near the end at all. And this is why I thought it was so interesting that earlier we talked about, like, not getting into the story until a certain... you were talking about, was it Jonathan Strange?
Yeah.
And how it seems like after 50 pages, it's pretty common for a person to say with a book, give it 50 pages and then it gets into the real story and the really good stuff. You just kind of have to give it some time. And so it's super common also for people to say with visual novels in particular, or like RPGs, give it 10 hours, give it 20 hours even. And after you're on rails for a little bit, after you kind of get all the tutorials done, then it opens way up and it's super fun and you get to make all these choices and the combat gets better and all this stuff, right? It's very rare for somebody to say, okay, you need to play this game for 40 hours and then you get to play the game the way you want to and it starts getting fun. It was at least 70 hours on the clock before the shell game ended for 100 Line for Last Defense Academy. So I'm just going to spoiler this because I think you have to talk about it at all.
Yeah. I mean, and you don't want to play this probably, but if you did want to play it,
most people don't want to play it.
You would need to know this going in to decide if you wanted to play it.
Yeah. So the basic structure of the story is that you have to be at this academy defending it via combat from invaders for 100 days. And then after 100 days, the war will be over. You'll go home. Everything will be fine. you play through that entire 100 days. You're hanging out with your friends, you're getting to know people, you're doing practice battles, you're collecting items that might be useful to you to level up.
Playing a little board game.
Right. There's a persuasion mini game where you're like trying to convince people to fight with you because, you know, you're dropped in here as teens and told you have to fight this war. And some of them are understandably like, no, I don't. Why?
Yeah, I don't want to do that, actually.
Yeah, sounds terrible. There are some deaths during that first 100 days. It's you know, very sad. But you play that entire 100 days, and that is the shell game that I'm referring to. That takes like, I heard in reviews that takes 40 hours. I believe it took us closer to 60 or 70 to get through it.
Yeah, I think like 60 would be my estimate. But yeah, like so many.
That's when the game begins.
Yes.
After that point is where the game begins, and you have multiple endings and multiple pathways forward.
Yeah, I remember I talked about this actually in the second episode of the pod when I was talking to Blorb, because I talked about how I had heard that the game had 100 endings and I didn't understand how that was possible because we were like 30 hours in and we hadn't made a single choice yet.
Yeah.
And now I know.
Yeah.
All the choices are after the first 60 to 1,000 hours.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and now even that we're closer to 150 hours in, apparently, we have made several choices. We have played through several endings.
We've seen 12. It keeps a count. We know where some other endings are that we probably could have knocked off really quickly because some of the endings are like choose your own adventure things where it's like you open the wrong door and you just die immediately and it's like, whoops.
Yeah, it's a dead end, essentially. Yeah, we've skipped several clear dead ends that like, yeah, we probably shouldn't jump out the window of this three-story building. I don't think that will be our best option here.
Although I did want to do that and I was proven wrong.
Yeah, no, we should do it just to see. So yeah, we've still seen so little of it, and each pathway is so distinct in certain ways that I was expecting this is going to be kind of a Groundhog Day sort of effect, right? Like, your goal in going through and playing these different versions of the timeline is to save more people, right?
Right.
Like,
you're just kind of optimizing. You're like, I know that when I go through that door, when I talk to that guy, or when I kill that monster, this happens. And so if I change the sequence, or I do that sooner, or I don't do that part, I'll save that person's life, and then we'll go from there.
And that's what you think will happen when you go play these alternate timelines, is that you'll be tweaking choices using your knowledge from other timelines to fix, create the best timeline.
Yeah.
Instead, what you find is that each timeline has its own weird, genre.
Yeah.
So we've now played through one that's like a zombie timeline.
Well, I think this one is the perfect example of like how divergent these are, how wildly unrelated they are, because we did a thing where we made a choice to stay in the school. We were told you can stay in the school or you can leave the school. And we did one option, and the rest of the game was about killer bees. Like there was more to it than that, but like the key players who made the most things happen, if we're honest, were the big killer bees that we have not encountered in any other timeline at all.
No.
And they don't even really make sense in the rules of the game as I understand them. And then if you make the other choice at that point, there are no killer bees, and instead there are zombies.
Yes.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah. I did just have the thought, like, maybe it was seriously wordplay. Somebody was like looking at the two options and they're like, this one has killer bees, this one has zombies. Like, that is seriously the level of like planning and foresight that I think went into this. And I say that as both derogatory and a compliment. Like, yeah, I feel like the team probably had a lot of fun coming up with storylines this divergent. And it also is kind of the only way, practically speaking, that you could produce this much content for a visual novel, you would have to split it up between just huge teams of writers who divide it up even further amongst themselves. Because, yeah, you just can't have like one dude or even two dudes writing that many storylines and having perfect
hundreds
oversight
of thousands of words.
And creating connection points between them, right?
Well, and this is the other thing that I do like when I think about it. I have intense anxiety on their behalf regarding what they lived through, and on my behalf in terms of what I'm going to live through. Because so the way that I talked earlier about how the way that this the Zero Escape Guys series works, where like you hit sort of a dead end and then you explore an alternate timeline and then you learn things that let you get past that dead end in the original timeline. This one has that too. We hit a point. It's happened to us once. It's lock 3 is what we found. Lock number 3. And we haven't seen lock number 1 or lock number 2.
Or any of the storylines required to pass through lock 3.
This is the thing. Lock 3 says you have to find these 4 endings to get through what is clearly like one of the main things that you need to do to see the quote true ending. We haven't seen any of the 4. We haven't found locks 1 or 2. I don't know where they are. And there's a meta story where like clearly the characters are time traveling, not only the loop that we know about, because that's what happens. You loop back, you try over and over again. Other people are looping too, and they're also moving between parallel universes. And a lot of the stories we've experienced so far don't make any sense because they involve somebody crossing over and doing something inexplicable in the timeline that you're in order to accomplish something, I guess, in a timeline we haven't seen.
It seems to be a lot of knocking the main character out.
Yeah.
Like, God, we just need this guy to be asleep for 5 seconds and stop doing whatever he's about to do so that we can do whatever we're about to do.
Yeah, the Killer Bee timeline, he gets knocked out like 6 times, and we ended that story. I don't know why.
I still don't know why he got knocked out all those times or by whom. They're also doing an infuriating thing where there is a somewhat recurring instance of a masked character or like a helmeted character.
Yeah.
And they will not, under any circumstances, reveal who's under that helmet. Like, they did do it once in this most recent timeline, but we've seen probably like 6 different iterations of guy in helmet.
Yeah.
And we have never once, except that one time, learned who was underneath the helmet.
Well, it's more infuriating than that. We have seen the helmet removed twice. And in both cases, it immediately became apparent that the guy who was under the helmet in that moment was not the one that we wanted to know about.
The guy under the helmet, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We don't know who the original guy is. We have no idea. And we've been through so many timelines. And so, like, this is, I mean, I wanted to talk about a few things. Partly, I just wanted to, like, talk through this fun thing that we're doing because we are having a good time despite the fact that it's like infuriating and bizarre. We're enjoying ourselves, and I want to talk through like some of the reasons that we enjoy it, what some of the pleasures are, also what some of the like deep frustrations are with this form, and they're very related. The worst and the best things about visual novels are connected to each other. And by the end of this podcast, which I hope will not be too long from now, because we want to have more respect for your time than these games do, I hope that you'll be interested in like maybe want to try one someday. Like I think the big pitch that I would actually give is if you have someone that you think it would be fun to read with, this is the best way to read with someone else that we've ever found, because we've tried reading to each other and it puts you to sleep, right? It's so relaxing. You're listening to your lover. They're reading you from a book, and like it soothes you and you go unconscious almost immediately, at least if you're me.
Well, for me, it must tap into like the sense memory of being read to sleep by your parents or something, like that's the main place I encountered it. So time to go to sleep.
Right. Well, it's like the safest feeling there is, basically, because it's like for me, that is the height of we are not expected to be anywhere, because if we were, we wouldn't be doing this, and nothing bad is going to happen, because if we were in danger, obviously we wouldn't be doing this. So like my whole body just like shuts down all of its defenses and then does what I guess it always naturally wants to do, which is lose consciousness.
Which is really sad to me, because I love reading to others. I love reading aloud, and you so rarely have a chance to do it in this life if you don't have a kid. So I would love to read to you, but it's not an option.
Yeah. Well, we do read to each other sometimes while we play this game.
It's true.
So to finish the thought, there's like several nested thoughts here. The pleasure and the horror of the dynamic we're describing is that these games are really good at setting up like mysteries that I don't know if in another context I would find them that compelling, but in a video game context, for whatever reason, just putting a guy behind a mask makes me lose my mind. And I need nothing more than to see who he is.
Yeah.
And they are so good. They're all like this, basically. Like all the well-made ones will generally create a million mysteries like that. Like you will be like, I don't understand how we're ever going to solve all these mysteries. And then they will, for some reason, drag it out so long, and then at the last possible second you'll get all these crazy reveals, and it's so cathartic getting those reveals and working your way up to them and trying to guess what's going to happen and being wrong most of the time, because usually it's like weirder and more elaborate, like you never would have come up with it. The desire to see this guy unmasked is intense, and there's like a million of these because of the way this game is structured. We're like, now I'm like, are the bees in any other timeline?
I know. Mike is very vocally obsessed with the bees. I have said many times, like, I'm not sure we'll see the bees again, and his brain can't handle it. Like, I see what it does to him to hear that statement.
Well, the whole like theory of this is that you're making little changes and then they spiral out in big ways. So like the premise of the game is that there's something we did by making the choice to leave or stay in that moment that triggered the bees or the zombies. Like and like I can't draw a line.
Those two options became inevitable and at that point, at that inflection point, and it is very difficult right now to see how.
And they both involve zombies even, but like in totally different ways.
Yeah.
That like seem impossible to bring together. And like there's a chance that none of it's going to come together. And
absolutely.
I'm just gonna be mad. I'd say that a lot of it won't, right? Like they've done too much different stuff. The spreadsheet is too big, but watching them try to make this happen is really hypnotic for me. And it's like, so I would say that in terms of pure story quality, this is worse than most TV shows I could watch. Like most TV shows I would seriously consider watching on like an HBO or whatever. I think the storytelling is worse, even if like some of the premises are more interesting than a lot of the things I would see in that context. But the mode in which it is delivered makes it really addictive and compelling for me anyway. Like I have way more time to waste on this than I do on most stuff. And it is, to go back to one of the other threads we have here, we do read to each other with this. Because sometimes one of us will get up and go do something, and the dialogue is paced in a way where it is totally possible for the person who stays with the game to just shout the dialogue at the other person. And most of the time they can tell without even attribution which character is speaking, which is it's an impressive feature of the writing. Sometimes you do have to give attribution, but it is a cooperative game in a really weird and interesting way. And like you can play these alone, but I do think that it is certainly this one would be too big of a sandwich to chew and swallow without assistance. This is like a 3-foot long sandwich, and the most I could handle on my own is 1 foot. But together, I think we can meet in the middle, right?
No, I already have full plans to, if we encounter timelines that we simply can't summon the patience for, I'm gonna play them on my own and like report back to you later what happens in them, because I will be playing all of this game.
Wait, you're gonna 100% it?
Well, I don't totally know what 100% means.
Like all 100
context.
Endings?
Yes.
That is fucked up. Like I love you, and a part of me wants to dissuade you from that because we've already encountered one timeline that we couldn't bear and had to bail out on and go to another one, which is a horrible dating game where you have the opportunity to consider falling in love with 3 different characters that you can also fall in love with in more compelling ways in other timelines. Like we've already fallen in love with one of the others in another story that was way better. And it's agonizing because they stick to the premise of you are going to spend 100 days in this story. So whenever you get into your new timeline, whenever the divergence starts, you look at what day you're on, you look at the difference between that and 100, and you feel a sense of dread in some cases. Like, how am I going to do this for 70 days? And that romance storyline is by far the worst we've bumped into in that regard. I cannot imagine sitting through the full thing. You'll at least skip a lot, right? Because I love you and I need to believe that you're not going to read every word of that.
Absolutely. And yeah, reading would be, I mean, I think the act of reading in these visual novels is different from other acts of reading.
Yes.
In several respects, but one of them is that, like, the visual novel, at least this one certainly does, trucks in a kind of skimming that is beyond any other kind of skimming I've ever done. And yeah, if I were to play the dating game simulator to the end, then it would very much be skimmed. I wouldn't say I would be fully skipping anything, but I would very much skim it.
Yeah, you usually need to read like 1 in 4 lines of dialogue to really get what's going on because, and the unfortunate thing is that, like, sometimes which one is a little unpredictable. And sometimes you realize, like, oops, I didn't pay attention to the one valuable line in these last 4 lines. Usually it's a little smarter than that. But again, like, so when I say that when you play this, you are interacting with and can very much feel that you're interacting with a massive Excel spreadsheet. That may sound really bad, and in some ways it is bad. One of the things that's bad about it is that, like, it feels like, you know, they've got, okay, day 34. We've got, what are we doing that day in this storyline? We got this scene. Okay, what's the subject of that scene? What's the information that needs to be given to the player? Okay, we're going to do that. And then there's like spots in the spreadsheet for like, and here's the thing that this character says about it. And here's the thing that this character says about it. Like every beat, it feels like after they put into the spreadsheet and then this story beat happens, it automatically populates rows with like, okay, here are the characters that are still alive. And here, there's 2 lines for each of them where we're going to check in with all of them about what they think this means before we go on to the next step. And it is both like, that is a bad way to do a story, but it fits the game. And like, when you think about what they had to do in terms of producing this, like what made it possible for them to write what I'm pretty sure are literally at least 1 million words of text, it's kind of the only way to do it, to make the spreadsheet make those choices for you to an extent. Yeah,
that's actually a really thoughtful point because, there's a temptation in a way to say, like, why is this not it? Yeah, the reason you can skim this stuff is because they have maybe 4 characters repeating essentially the same idea. You know, they're reacting to or processing the same information 4 different ways. And, you know, in an ideal world, the way they're processing it tells you something about those characters. But in these cases, it usually doesn't. It's just flavor. So that's the reason you can skim it, is because any one of those dialogues will give you the information.
Right.
To follow the story. You don't actually need to hear from everybody. So yeah, then the question becomes like, well, why not revise it? Why not pare it down? Why can't we just hear from 1 or 2 of the people, and why do we have to check in with everyone in the room? And that is actually harder and more time consuming.
Yes.
Rather than writing a line of dialogue for everybody reacting to the same thing, it would be more time consuming to say which 2 of these put together would give you the same information.
Yes. We actually know what it looks like to do a game that is revised in that way, because they did do pretty serious revision to Disco Elysium, which we've discussed on this podcast, which you and I agree is like, if not the best written video game ever, then certainly in the top 5. And they did kind of make themselves crazy doing the work necessary. Like that studio is broken now. Those people don't work together anymore. And part of it is that they did put in the work necessary to do the revision, because like revision takes twice as long as generating the text. You have to have the idea, you have to write it down, you have to look at it, you have to think about it, you have to go back and look at it again in light of things that come later. In this sort of setting, you're probably working with somebody else. Like the expense in time and cognition of thinking through how could this be better is so much higher than the cost of generating the material. And like for some things, that's actually where most of the important stuff is happening, right? Like for novels, at least as written in the sort of professionalized, post MFA United States, and the places where that culture has its tendrils, you do the revision to find the good thing. And before you do the revision, the general consensus is you don't have anything worth sharing at all.
Right. It's more like the ideas are all there, but because they're all kind of on top of each other, they're less, emphatic or less. They hit worse. They
don't have the clarity.
Right.
You need to go back and structure them because you didn't know when you were writing it what the best ideas were going to be. And that's true here too, but there is not time. There is genuinely not time. There is not money. There is not life force in the human bodies that generated the text to go back and do that if we want to have anything like this scope. And even truly a third of this, there still wouldn't be time to do that because all of the incentives would push against that. And so like this is like both the reason that most people probably won't totally get on with this kind of thing is like, it's kind of bad to just you're being directly exposed to the spreadsheet. Like this is a forum where you feel the conditions of production, you feel the people working. They might as well be sitting next to you a lot of the time. Crazy things happen that don't work. And you're like, I know why that happened because I'm looking over the shoulder of the guy who did it. And I can see the mess in his spreadsheet that he's having to reconcile. Or I can see the way that the writing is bumping up against the programming of the game. The programming wasn't ready for this story. The programming didn't know that this story was going to happen. And there wasn't time to fix it when they found out.
Yeah, like I wonder that, for an example, I wonder that with the zombie timeline because we have noticed just how much more business there is in terms of switching game modes in this particular instance of the timeline. Like one, they had to create extra art. They had to create several extra pieces of art of zombie versions of the characters. And then they also had to enter this like terrible stealth / chase mode.
Yeah, it's awful.
Like moving around the map in this game is not impressive. It doesn't feel immersive. It doesn't feel in any way like, a platformer would or something. It doesn't feel challenging.
There's no expression for the player, really.
Yeah.
We usually just use the menu to navigate from place to place in the school. We skip the walking around entirely.
Yeah, there's no reason to do it, except that this time they wanted you to feel pursued by zombies. So they had to work with, I am assuming they had to work with the existing walking around mechanics of the game to make it feel like, how can we make the player feel like they're being pursued by zombies and not just tell them in the narration that they're being pursued by zombies.
Right.
And they're having to do things with like, they're doing a lot more with, effects, like visual effects, like they're snapping the portrait, the character portrait suddenly into screen with like a shutter move, or they're whisking them off to the side to indicate that they're doing an attack. They don't do that in the other timelines. The other timelines are pretty static, at least most of the ones we've seen. So it ends up making it feel like either they had to work within the extreme constraints of the game, and it makes it feel like, weirdly, like, is this zombie timeline going to be more important than the others?
Yeah, because they had to spend more money on it than most of the others.
Right.
Like, really, obviously, there's no way to do this cheaply.
Yeah, and so it makes me wonder that it creates new forms of narrative that are really... that create new questions in your head, like you were saying. Like, even if these don't get resolved, it's kind of fun to think about, like, okay, so is this overall thing a story where the zombie timeline is actually super important compared to some of the others? Like, it must be, right? Because it's getting more emphasis. And I think we'll get to the end and we'll find that it's not. But
I think this one is going to be important. I think that this is... I will put my bet on this one matters because there are several things in it that feel like they're going to be explained in other timelines. And that, to me, is a likely marker of importance in the overall scheme of this game, is intersections with other timelines.
I do suspect it's going to be one of our missing endings that we need to open a lock. So yeah, and you know, how much of all of that was intentional? I don't know that it was that intentional to say we're going to really invest in this particular timeline, but it became important by virtue of the amount of work and ideas put into it. And that's how I feel about the game in general, is like, you know, the characters too. Like, the characters are not in and of themselves that interesting. They're all types, you know, they're all like strong particular types. There's like there's a motorcycle gang guy, you know, tough guy, and there's a plucky female mechanic, and there's the childhood best friend.
The strategy is very much, there's a type and then there's one thing that's incongruous that cuts against that type. So like the lady samurai is extremely confused about what samurai do. And actually a lot of the time she's doing ninja stuff and she doesn't realize it. And the gangster biker guy is actually like extremely responsible and careful and upright in a way that is like obviously owes a lot to the Yakuza series.
Yeah, kind of a big softy in a way. But then there's these unexpected things too that I don't think are meant really to convey character. They just do because they're extra on top of their extra writing on top of the character foundation, right? Like with that biker character, there's a timeline where for some reason it's always him that we go to for information about other people.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's because that they wanted to show that character was like attentive and a good friend necessarily. Just that's who they decided you needed to go to in that particular quest mechanic. Like, you need to go talk to the biker guy. He's going to tell you the stuff.
Right. And that ended up telling the story that we have internalized that, yes, he's a very thoughtful listener who cares about his friends and remembers when they mention things they might like for Christmas.
Right. Yeah, which is a darling little headcanon to have.
Yeah.
And then makes it all the more weird when in certain timelines he seems not to care about anybody as friends and is very much kind of, I don't know, not out for himself exactly, but he doesn't have camaraderie with everyone.
Yeah, little things change and he just kind of cuts people out of his circle of empathy before he has a chance to get to that place with them. And that turns out to be a pretty hard distinction for him.
Which is all... You could try to communicate that in a reduced way. You know, you could try to communicate that level of complexity with concision and very careful selection of detail. But it's more fun and much easier to produce it by just adding it on and saying, he's also this guy, and he's also this guy, and he also acts like this in this situation. When there's killer bees, he's going to act this way. and it's going to add complexity without actually, I don't know, adding up to any singular version of a character, right?
Yeah, no, they don't like really hold together as people. And you can take that as an argument about what people are like and how contingent their personalities are. And I find that somewhat persuasive.
Yeah.
But also it is like you said, like these games, this is true of the genre in general. It tends to actually be like insanely ambitious. And then they take the easiest, cheapest route to their ambitions. And to me, that is like kind of beautiful and inspirational to watch.
Yes.
I love watching them cobble together out of their limited resources these massive stories with incredible scope and these crazy characters that they can't quite figure out how to depict. For me, that's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of saying what I appreciate about the genre in general, and it's why I like writing visual novels. It ends up being so fun to work with those constraints and to think about sort of what is the shortest distance between where I am and where I want to be, which is important too because you have the sort of unknown element of the player's agency in it. We've talked a lot as we've been playing this one. A lot of people dislike visual novels because they feel on rails. They just feel like, well, I'm just reading a video game. I'm just pressing X to advance the dialogue. I'm not really making any choices. With this one in particular, the choices are doing less of the work than the order in which you end up playing the timelines. And it's so interesting to me to think about if Mike and I had chosen the Killer Bees timeline first.
Yeah, we could have seen it a lot earlier.
Yeah, like that's a very different sense of the world and the overall game than what we did choose to do first, which I'm going to go ahead and say was probably like the most a changeless option or whatever. You know what I mean? Like the least impactful change. We made the most rational decision, essentially.
And I feel like that is evidence. Every now and then you see evidence that they've been a little more thoughtful in putting things together than you think they have. Like a lot of it feels really ramshackle and slapdash while you're playing it. And then you have those moments where it's like, if I think about it, they did position the choices kind of carefully so that I'm probably not getting to the Killer Bee storyline first. Like you could. It's not hard to do. It's fairly intuitive to do it reasonably early, but it is not the first thing that would occur to you. The choices that get you there are definitely like second or third time through choices where you're like, well, my good choices that seemed like the right way to go didn't really work out for me. I'm going to try these kind of weirder things and see how they go. We took a little while to get to this. We thought we were going to record it earlier than we did. And so I've had like a bunch of thoughts saved up. And so there's a couple I just want to like say at you and you'll see. So like one thought I had, this seemed like really deep to me in a way when I thought of it. And now it's so goofy, but I still feel strongly about it. I thought about how the bad guys in this game are called invaders. Which is obviously partly a reference to the game Invaders, and they kind of enter the level because we haven't even talked about there's a strategy mode in this. There's like essentially a game within a game where you fight the alien monsters, and it becomes less important as you go. It's pretty well made, but eventually you're not really playing it much. You just skip through fights you've already done in other timelines. But I was thinking about how the invaders, they march down into the level similarly to how invaders in the game Invaders do. They're in ranks, and they slowly advance on you while you shoot at them. And I was thinking about how there is actually, there's so much anxiety among fans of visual novels and creators of visual novels about whether they're real games because of the choice thing you were talking about, Tracy. And I feel like reading line by line as the prose enters the speech bubbles as it unfolds feels to me a lot like zapping the invaders in the game Invaders as they scroll in there. To me, it was like, I kind of feel like my reading is a gun that is blowing up this text as it goes. And I deal with it, and we have it play automatically for us. So like we have a speed. One thing I will say about this game is that it has the best, like the most perfectly aligned, automatic speed. Like normally we can't do that because it's way too slow. And this one is like exactly enough time to read it very comfortably with another person and exactly enough time to shout it to the person when they leave the room. There's like just enough time to make that happen. And that ends up just keeping your brain alive, and reading at the right pace ends up feeling like it feels kind of action gamey in a way that's, it doesn't matter, but I enjoyed when I thought about it.
I'm sure there's an essay somewhere about sort of the inherent agency of pressing X, or, that makes it different from just reading a mass of text that's before you and deciding when and where to stop. There's something about having text parceled out to you in little tiny bits that you have to acknowledge. Which again, like you said, when you have the auto on, you're not necessarily acknowledging it so much, but they still do, you get like 2 lines at a time, right? Mm-hmm. I think there's something that does change about the way you read and the way you think about the information that you're getting in a visual novel when you're getting it a couple lines at a time.
Yeah, well, it makes it possible for you to like sustain that attention through incredibly long stretches in a way that can be difficult with a book. Like the little bit of you're allowed to think about something else for a second because we're in the pause before the next lines of text appear, and then you have to tune back in and pay good attention. There's something about that push and pull that makes it engages the reading part of your brain in a different way that is like really pleasurable, but also possible to do at times when normal reading is like a little too much for you.
You know what? I was just thinking, like, I feel like when I'm reading a normal book, my attention is sort of like a sine wave or something, right? Like I'm sort of rising, like paying more attention, most attention, and then like it naturally falls off. Like usually a book can't really sustain and shouldn't sustain like peak intensity for too long. You kind of need the valleys and the places to breathe, and I feel like that's something that people who enjoy reading enjoy about reading, right? Yeah. Like it's just a really nice sort of natural experience of intensities. But with this, because every line is fed to you that way, they all kind of have the same weight and importance, which leads to very funny things like, a running joke with me and Mike is how very, very much the main character loves returning to his room because that's a very functional piece of dialogue. In fact, it's so functional that I have told him, I wonder if they programmed something in to like whenever they have the phrase return to my room to automatically switch scenes, because it feels so tied to like a keyword system.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, mentioned room, go to room set. It's so consistent that they mention this character is going back to his room that it ends up feeling like that's very important to him.
Yes. He loves it more than anything else in the world, going back to that room.
Whereas if you encountered that in a book, right, then it's a valley. It's a functional piece of narration that just sort of gets you, it's an establishing shot or whatever that just sort of gets you into the right setting. I would say in a book, you don't even need it necessarily.
Usually you don't have to narrate the character constantly returning to a room.
Right. But here in this format, you do. You need to know what their basic setting is to sort of make sense of the scene change often. And so, I don't know. I guess it just, it makes every piece of information feel like it's equal weight instead of sort of the wave of coming and going, which is a very different way to read. And I think some might find it kind of overwhelming, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and it makes there is so much cognitive dissonance in these. The tone is so wild. The fact that it is this constant up and down of crazy, like, oh no, this is happening. Oh, good. We're all friends. We fixed it. Oh no, now this is going wrong. But like, it's delivered in that way that you're talking about, where like the vibe never changes no matter how much the tone shifts around in these crazy ways. It's a really interesting kind of attention to pay to a thing that is like simultaneously, it's like kind of needling, but it is compelling. It makes you stick with it. You're waiting to see the bees or the guy get unmasked or whatever. For most people, it's not a game about bees. That's just me. But so my last like kind of formal thought about this is I was thinking about how like I think that prose is my favorite thing in large part because it shows the most work that any art possibly can. It shows you the most what was done to produce it. Because however much thinking and planning and discussion and sleepless nights or whatever went into making the choices that made you write the words in the book, ultimately everyone reading a book knows exactly how the book was produced. You pressed that sequence of keys. right? Like
At
that
some
is
point,
yes,
right?
at some
Yeah.
point you pressed all of those keys to create the sequence that is presented to the reader. You're right, it does happen non-linearly, so you know that it isn't. But I mean, with this is part of the thing. This is part of what's so compelling to me about this form is like it actually was mostly in this order, for
Right.
the reasons we talked about earlier. Like
Yeah.
because the realities of production are so intense, you actually are seeing them think through the game as they're writing it. You're seeing them. Obviously, it's a translation, so we're not seeing the exact words they did, but we're seeing the translation was the same thing. It was also people interacting with an overwhelming spreadsheet and just trying desperately to get all the work done before the scheduled release. And I really love having such a direct view again into that productive process, into the art, so that I feel like I'm kind of making it with them as I'm like, you guys are doing this. I wanted to go over here and do that. That's such a weird approach, but I see what you're doing. Okay, I'm with you. I really love that about it.
Well, and sometimes that does lead to moments where it's like, did you guys forget about the bees?
Yeah. And sometimes the answer is yes. Like sometimes they just forget stuff. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, no, sometimes it feels like, maybe there is a super complicated explanation that that made this timeline make sense, but you had to have your character actively forget some things that were happening in order to advance the story. And that kind of expediency is it's just kind of fun to see. It's fun to puzzle over. It's fun to ask yourself, like, are they going to pick this back up, or are we ever coming back here again? I don't know. Again, I feel like when you said you wanted to talk about visual novels, I had the thought, like, my goal here, if I could name a goal for this episode, it would be to like convince Justin McElroy that there is value in this genre. And then pretty quickly after considering that, I was like, no, that'll never happen, because everything I love about them is a fault.
Yeah.
By any reasonable standard.
Yeah.
But all those faults kind of end up adding up to something that I think is a really unique and special act of creation. I think it's one that communicates, like you said, it kind of communicates what the creators were up against better than almost any other form.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I'll put a list of some suggestions in the show notes, because I wanted to talk about some things that people might enjoy, and we don't have time here, but there's a few that I think might be interesting to folks, because this is not the one you should start with, almost
absolutely
certainly.
Not.
But I do want to briefly talk a little bit just about the stuff that the Danganronpa guy contributed aesthetically, the guy who wrote those games, and also like what the artist and the musician brought, because it was the two writers that we've talked about, the Danganronpa writer and the Zero Escape series writer, started this company, but it was also the person who did the music and the art for the original Danganronpa series, which have a very specific kind of feel to them. And the Danganronpa aesthetic is a really fascinating, really specific thing that I just wanted to talk about briefly. So like Danganronpa is a series of they're called killing games is kind of the name of the genre. And I don't know where this starts, honestly, because in some ways I would trace this back to Battle Royale, which is a Japanese novel from like the early 2000s.
I think Battle Royale is one of the
like
first.
90s.
Yeah, I thought it was older than that, because when did the movie come out?
Yeah, no, I think it must be in the 90s, because I remember shelving the book when I worked as a teenager at the library. And I love that book, by the way. It's like, it's not perfect, but it is really good, and the movie is really good too. But yeah, I think that might be the beginning. And now like Squid
I think
Game,
it's at least like the genre.
Yeah.
Example of it.
Right. And I think Squid Game is definitely the most popular version now of this format, where there's a metafictional thing going on where you know that the point of reading the thing or playing the game is to see a series of like really unpleasant things happen. And the mechanics of how you're going to see the unpleasant things happen, they're explicitly in the story as game mechanics, right? So the Danganronpa series has kind of like Squid Game, a series of like, there's going to be murders happening here because of the rules of the world that we're establishing in the story. And you solve each one of these murders happens, and then you are responsible for solving the mystery of how and why it happened. And they get weirder and more elaborate and stuff. And the thing I'm curious, I don't think we've really talked about this. The thing that I think those games are about, and this game in a lot of ways is also about, like in terms of the tone and texture, is that when you're put into an extreme circumstance like that, it creates a state of exception wherein you can express yourself in the most crazy, like outsized way possible. You can be the wildest version of yourself. Actually, there's a character who talks about this explicitly in this game, in Last Defense Academy, where she says, I was really boring and I always did my homework and I did what I was supposed to do and my family was boring. But then when I go into battle, which is what produces the state of exception in this game, I can be myself. I can be the wildest, craziest version of myself. I can have a really meaningful experience that is a total break with daily reality. And that's really important to me. And that's why I love to fight.
Mm-hmm. No, and I was thinking too that part of the challenge of this genre that any writer of it has to work with is like sort of the natural, everyone who's in the killing game is usually everyone is there unwillingly, right? They find themselves in these circumstances. They are forced into them. They are coerced into killing, which is something that the majority of them would never consciously seek out to do.
Yeah.
And some of them, most of them even often are very against it and are like, I would never, well, we're not actually going to kill each other, guys, because, like, I don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. And now we're friends, and we don't want to do that either. So, yeah, that genre becomes partly about, like, the lengths that people will go to when they feel pushed into a corner.
Right.
But then also, like you said, just sort of the more extreme
they ratchet up the pressure, like the mechanics of the story will ratchet up the pressure until somebody breaks. That's kind of the format of the Danganronpa games in particular. And it's occurring to me now, Hunger Games might actually be the most famous version of this. I don't know how to rank that versus Squid Game, but it continually, there are new pressures introduced until somebody cracks and does a murder. And then you got to sort through what caused that person to crack and why they've gone from being your friend to being this murderer. And like, there's a lot that's kind of, I don't know, you could object to a lot of things about that kind of story structure.
Right. Because I do often get frustrated with media that seem to want to claim like inside of us all is a murderer and we're all willing to do horrific things for under the right circumstances. Because I don't really agree. I always kind of get mad at stuff when sort of their fundamental assumption is like, well, obviously at some point everyone will turn to murder. Like that's the inevitable conclusion to which we are all led in dire straits, right?
Yeah. The thing in an HBO show where something kind of weird happens and a character looks a little stressed out, and from having seen a lot of these other things, like somehow that's going to cause that guy to kill somebody in 3 episodes. I don't know how.
Right.
I don't know how this could possibly lead to that. It doesn't seem relevant, but that's where this goes. Somebody's going to have to die.
And I don't appreciate those shows asking me like, wouldn't you? What would you do in this situation? And it's like, I guess I would just die, okay? I would just lay down and die. Yeah. That's an option.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get kind of mad when that's the idea, but yeah, it does seem like the Japanese killing game genre does focus more on that, like, I don't know, more about knowing someone. It's more about knowing someone than snapping.
Yeah.
It's less of a personality break than it is a personality discovery in a way.
Yeah. And I mean, like, the Danganronpa guy got sick of writing them. The third one in that series is, by the end, a pretty intense rebellion against the whole concept, and that's part of why he moves on. But then he ends up this is his bread and butter. So, like, Last Defense Academy is not really one of those, but like the structure of it is always there, and there are a couple storylines that are more like that. But even then, he fights it the whole way through. He never really embraces that genre, but he does explore again that state of exception and the Like, the characters in these games are constantly frothing from all the holes in their faces.
Yeah.
One of the rules of these games is that every bodily fluid looks like jizz.
Yes.
and when you cry,
that's just the art style.
yeah, when you cry, when your nose is running because you're so upset, when you're vomiting, when you're drooling, like, all of it comes out as this white foam that is clearly meant to evoke horny juices, right? And so what happens is these characters get pushed and pushed and pushed, and they go crazier and crazier and crazier, and they get hornier and hornier.
Yes.
And
horny for any number of things,
yes.
right? Like, it's horniness is an attitude that they strike toward any number of, like, they're horny for machines, they're horny for medicines, they're horny for, rarely, honestly, are they horny for each other.
Yeah. Sometimes they do have sex, but that almost feels irrelevant in a lot of cases. It's not even really the culmination of the horniness. There's the one in this game who has the big thing for his sister, which is a little, you got to adapt to that.
Again, though, a type.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yes.
It's how they had something to work with, that they knew they could always write this guy because he will always be saying something in relationship to his dear sister, whom he loves so much.
So I don't really have like a big argument to make about that beyond the fact that I do think it is an interesting space that they found. I think that this guy using each of these games to explore different kinds of horny maniacs that could exist. Like, sometimes it feels a little bit one note, but for the most part, I enjoy that this guy found a sort of fictional framework that allows him to do that, and like to explore the aesthetic space that's associated with that. I think for a lot of our listeners, honestly, like that, if I were trying to sell you on this guy's stuff, that would have been the thing that I led with, that this is the most derangedly horny aesthetic that has ever existed in any relatively successful piece of art.
I'm just happy that in this game, in this most recent game, they've found each other. Like, that makes me very happy that these two found each other. I hope they work together again, because I just feel like in some ways they are two very horny individuals for their specific type of storytelling.
Right.
And they can't get enough. They're insatiable. And this is the only way that they can express themselves. So I'm happy that they found each other.
Yeah. The time travel guy, the Zero Escape guy, he can only tell stories about time travel and getting murdered because you didn't do the time travel right in one storyline, but then finding the timeline where you barely managed to survive, and like all the really grim, depressing things you see on the way to the timeline that works out.
They were meant for each other. Together they can do great things. And maybe that's kind of the evolution of both of their stories.
Yeah, it is so beautiful to me that they got together and the Danganronpa guy had the stupidest, craziest idea for a game ever. And the other guy tried to talk him out of it. And then the result was they absolutely did it. They did the craziest version of both of their things combined.
Well, am I wrong too? It looked like from the story I was seeing here that the Danganronpa guy was like, I want it to have just innumerable endings.
Yes, he wanted it to be essentially endless. I assume that was a bit rhetorical because I don't think he's a total, like he knows a little bit about how this stuff works.
No, he would have to know that it has to end in some way.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea that the Zero Escape guy's responsible is like, well, no, not that. 100 endings, maybe.
Not infinity. That's excessive. 100 we might be able to do. That's like you and I when we sat down to record this podcast, which has, like the game, gone on for too long, and we'll see how I edit it and how nonlinear the edit is. I do think some chunks might move around, but I've enjoyed talking with you about this, and I don't know a more graceful way to end this conversation.
I don't think you need one.
No, not really. We're gonna turn off the microphones and then go hang out more. So that's why it would be there's no natural ending, because there is no ending. Like the game, our love is eternal.
I think we probably found the ending like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Also like the game. Now I am still in the market, and you've been really stern about this with me, that you don't think "Thank You, Tony" is a good sign off. Every time I say that it's not quite working for me, like almost like it's not a good idea. And I'm like, I know it's not a good idea. Why are you trying to prove to me something I already agreed to? I just stipulate that "Thank You, Tony" is not a great sign off. Do you have a better sign off?
Why would your guest have to come up with it? That's so cruel to put that on your guest. This is your responsibility. But I think "Thank You, Tony" is a fine sign off for today, because he's been here the entire time we've been recording, and he's been very good.
Oh.
And I thank him for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
One,
2,
3,
4,
5,
6,
7,
8.
Okay, that should be good.
Cool. I am familiar with the format. I'm your biggest fan.
So we can just speak naturally in a really unstilted manner.
Yeah.
Where you kind of forget that you're even on a show, actually,
Yeah.
is sort of the genius of it. Is like you begin to feel as if you're just in the room with me, your husband, Mike.
Yeah, and we're just having a natural conversation together as lovers.
Yes, as lovers, this is the way that we usually speak to each other. This is the rhythm, the cadence, and the ambient level of eroticism.
Yeah, all feels right. All feels natural.
Before we get into today's, we got a couple subjects on the schedule. What have you been, how's the reading been going for the past few weeks? I feel like I'm a little bit behind on what you're spending your reading time with.
Oh, yeah, I've got a couple things in the hopper, and none of them are coming along with super speed. I dived a little deeper into Yukio Mishima when I got the Alien book that we talked about on our last podcast together. I also got this tiny little, almost like a chapbook. I think he published it as a short story or a series of short stories, but then a publishing company later on bound it into this tiny little volume that I keep in my purse. And so I've been keeping that in my purse for now several months, and have finally finished reading, this short story called Star. And that was fun. That was about an actor who starts to just sort of feel the artificiality of his existence. That is a very quick summary. There's no reason to go into it further than that. It's a very moody, it's like a mood piece, I think, as much as anything.
Yeah.
I've been reading 2 sort of lyrical essay books. One is called Heretic. I don't remember the author. Should I go get these?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can edit out the silence.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Tracy has taken off their headphones. So this is also an option that I'm kind of giving myself for later. Maybe I'll say something really funny and interesting while Tracy's gone, and you and I will know that. Listener, but Tracy won't, and we'll have that as kind of a special secret between us. They've sat back down, but have not yet put on their headphones, so they don't know about the cool secrets I'm telling you. Hi, honey. I didn't say anything while you were gone.
Oh, nice.
The listener and I don't have any cool, sexy secrets.
Yeah, I didn't make any noise while you were gone. Any noises of sort of throwing my headphones on the floor, settling back into my chair, which makes a sound like packing tape when I sit down into it.
No grunts.
Yeah. Oh, did I make some grunts?
No, I don't know. I'm guessing. About the sounds you didn't make.
At my age, often I do when I get up these days, make a grunt.
I'm actually, before we get back into the business of the podcast, I do need to ask about the listener does not know how completely insane the view behind you makes me feel, because they don't know that you're sitting with your back to all of the stuff that we usually are facing when we're sitting in the living room together, because you're, I guess, not on the couch. You've put a folding chair, and then I don't know. It's really unnerving to me to see you with your back to the television, the little bookshelves that have our various media properties, the display case with the fancy Transformers, the less fancy Transformers, the wrestling memorabilia, and the Star Wars droid piggy bank. It's really upsetting for me to see you not looking at any of those beloved items and instead looking at, I guess, your laptop on a TV tray is what I have to infer.
Yep. Yeah. No, I've simply reversed the usual podcast setup. I know that see, the weird thing is you're used to this view. This is the view directly from the couch.
Yes.
What you're not used to is me sitting directly across from you in this view, staring back at you as if I was the TV screen.
I think this is the thing, is that if I put myself in the room from the perspective that you've created, this is an extremely confrontational position because I've got my back to the couch and you are sitting nose to nose with me, confronting me instead of acknowledging or interacting with anything else in the room. And I don't love that. It tells a very upsetting story about this conversation.
Oh, it feels like we're having a family meeting.
Yeah, so some kind of fight. I just don't know why you.
Why won't I sit on
me.
Why won't I sit on the couch with you? I don't know.
We should be hugging side by side. Holding hands.
I will say I have an excellent view of the cats. The cats are basically taking up all the room on the couch. So
okay,
if you think about it, I had to sit here.
Can you give me a cat count? How many cats are we looking at on the couch right now?
I am currently looking at 2 cats.
I'm going to guess Molly and Tony.
Well done.
Mila, if she's on the couch, often there's some business, there's some struggling, she's burrowing under something. And that wasn't the vibe I was getting from you, that there was a struggle taking place. So that was kind of how I reasoned it out.
These are 2 very comfortable cats. It's true.
Is his face near her butt?
No, they are on opposite sides.
Oh, nice. Nice. Usually he's not that considerate.
No.
Usually he's like, what's up? We're almost cuddling. I'm not touching you, but you can sort of imagine what it would be like if I were.
Yeah. No, they're both separate balls.
So you went and got a couple of books to tell us about both lyric essay books. One called Heretic.
Yeah. The first one is Heretic by Jeanna Kadlec. And it's about a woman who grew up in the Midwest, like myself, and grew up in an evangelical family and is just kind of coming to terms with the way the evangelical church responds to and treats homosexuality and gender divergence and things like that. So, this one is, I say lyrical essay, that is why I got it. It's, both personal essays and some nonfiction sort of research coverage of the topic. It's a little more research than I expected, so that's been interesting. I'm reading these kind of as models for the project I'm working on.
Is it using the research to sort of make a case for its own relevance? Like, this many people in the Midwestern evangelical church have reported this experience.
So far, no. It's been more of a history of the evangelical church and sort of how it became a distinct entity from other sects and how it interplays with politics and changes that happened in the 60s and 70s with regard to religion and public life and things like that. So yeah, mostly a historical rise to power in a way.
I always feel a little confused about the evangelical church thing because I'm pretty sure I grew up in what was technically an evangelical church.
Yeah, I would say you did.
They didn't call themselves that. They said they were an open Bible church, is my memory. But they certainly encouraged us to evangelize. In retrospect, what I think was happening, because we drove pretty far out of our way to go to this particular one. I think that it was sort of the fancy person's evangelical church in the area, because it was we do want you to evangelize, and nothing that I remember from my time there really contradicts anything I've heard about evangelical churches, except that they wanted everyone to be comfortable. They wanted kind of a chill vibe about the evangelism for the most part. And so I did have the moments in like my middle school church days where they told us like, it's actually time for you to go out and start witnessing to your friends. And I did. I made a sincere effort to make a plan to have a concept of an idea of when I would do that, because I believed wholeheartedly, like clearly this is important for me to do. But I remember I was like, who is my friend that I know is not Christian? And I chose a person who was at the time I thought of as like in some ways my closest friend, who was Jewish. And
cool.
That was my goal. I was like, I'm going to tell him, and it's going to be, I remember talking about it in the, the youth group conversation. I was like, I think it's going to be kind of awkward because like, I'm kind of telling him like, you're almost there, but you missed it by a little bit.
There's just and this other half of the book. If you would just read it, I think you'd come around.
And thankfully, I was too much of a coward to follow through on my plan because it was a stupid fucking plan. But on some level, like, I don't know. I think I recognized that I shouldn't do it.
Yeah, you were set up to fail. I think that, this book is very much about the witnessing thing and how people were encouraged to sort of farm their networks for God. Yes. and just how awkward a position that is to put people within, and how ultimately separating it is, right? Like you can't help but create separation between yourself and the person you're talking to. It's so hard to picture a successful version of that. You know, they always in church itself, they always depicted that person, this person they were imagining you bringing to church. They pictured it as somebody who was really going through a rough time.
Yes, which at the time felt sweet and well-intentioned.
Right.
And now is like, oh, well, obviously they were training you for the one scenario where a person would be weak enough to actually go for your bullshit.
Uh-huh. Well, and they also posited often a person who had sort of no relationship to spirituality or to no awareness whatsoever of any kind of religion. And so right now, unbidden, I am thinking of the Christmas pageant that we held one year where the plot was this guy has like never heard of Christmas, but he recognizes that the world is going crazy for Christmas. You know, it's like they're running around, they're getting all these toys and presents, and there's so much spending money, and yet he feels really lonely. And, you know, it's this merry time of year, and he's not feeling merry at all. Perhaps if a good friend of his ran into him after several years of being out of high school, 20 years later, say, and said, hey, it seems like you're struggling. Why don't you come to my church's Christmas pageant? That's right. This was a pageant within a pageant.
Oh, nice.
Maybe this guy would come around and he would get what he needed out of this holiday, right? It wouldn't just be the busyness and the hectic energy anymore.
I want them to have the courage of their convictions in this and have them at this point sit down in the front row, maybe with a spotlight shining down on them so you do remember where they are, but just let them watch the pageant for the next 10 minutes or so.
That's true. I'm trying to remember the staging. I think they set up an audience off to the side.
Right.
On the stage. But you're right, it would have been amazing.
Chairs.
Yes, it would have been amazing if they just put them in the front row. Anyway, I got really down the track with that. Just real quick about that book, I think there's things I like about it. I don't know. It's the first book in a while. I don't know if I'll make it all the way through it, because what I was going to say about the research too is that it feels like it's designed to explain the evangelical church a little bit to people outside it and to sort of humanize it a little bit. I don't mean apologize for it. I just mean like, here's the real experience of being inside it, whereas you might have kind of a narrativized experience of what it would be like. And that's not a bad endeavor at all, I don't think, but it is, to me, very familiar, right? So I don't need you to prove to me that this is how it operates, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that because there are cultural gaps in the country that I don't really understand or recognize with regard to religion because I basically grew up in it because we're both Midwestern former Christians. Like, I'm always baffled by the idea that people think that it's a strange, confusing thing.
Yeah.
But every now and then I am reminded, like, no, there are genuinely people in the country who grew up totally outside this framework where this wasn't the dominant. Like, when people talk about it on TV is when I'm always really hit with that. When somebody reveals that they're Christian, that they're a religious person in a TV show, and everybody else in the show is like, I honestly don't know where to begin with this weird.
Yeah.
So he's like, I guess in LA it's possible to avoid or something. I don't really understand it.
No, she's talking about going to school on the East Coast. Like, she went to college on the East Coast and people were just kind of flummoxed by it. They didn't know what to do with this information. Or the idea, for example, that she might be Christian and also, basically believe in science. Like, it's foreign in a way that, like you said, it's baked in here. There was such an assumption, at least this was my experience. I don't know if it was yours, but there was such an assumption in Indiana growing up that unless you knew otherwise, people were going to church and they were going to a very similar church as you. I think it's still the case that Indiana has like the highest number of churches per capita of any state.
That makes sense. Just driving around, it certainly feels that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
There another one is.
Right. They're just like any neighborhood has like its own little sub church.
Yeah.
And that's less true now than it was. But yeah, it just felt like, unless people don't talk to you, then they are also in the same kind of church you are, just maybe a little down the road.
Yeah. And what was the other one you're reading?
Oh, yeah. The other one is called Devil's Tango: How I Learned the Fukushima Step by Step by Cecile Pineda. And it is much more of a lyric essay, a set of lyric essays. They're like one page a piece. And it was written, it seems like almost day by day, like diary-esque, in the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011. It's not explicitly day by day, but it feels like, we're at 36 days after the incident, 42 days after the incident. And it feels like it was written in the course of maybe a year or two, just reflecting on particularly the idea of nuclear radiation and its spread around the planet, and the idea that people say that it's okay, it's not going to spread, it's not going to, taint the water or the air, we buried it, it's fine. And it comes from, I would say, a very ideological place. Like, it is part of, for this author, I think it is part of a larger frustration with and sort of crusade for environmental protections.
Sure.
Which is something I agree with, but sometimes do find myself in the way we were just talking about, feeling like this is kind of a different culture from me, like that this feels awful, have time to care about this in this specific way.
Yeah.
Like, this is top of mind for you, is that somewhere halfway across the world, there's nuclear waste.
The whole nuclear power thing has become... People are so wrapped up in their feelings about it that I really, at this point, don't know how I would begin a conversation with someone about it, because I've been so convinced that, there was a period where it was like, I think the people who are hostile to the nuclear power skeptics probably have a good point, because ultimately we need to get carbon out of the air, and nuclear power is part of the mix, and we're going to need it to be part of the mix, and that's just the way life is. And then people got so hostile to the people who are skeptical of nuclear power that I started to feel like, well, I don't know if I'm like, I don't know if I want to boost this approach. It's not unreasonable to have questions and concerns about it. And now we're at this point where, like, China is they're like gonna essentially make power free over there. They've been doing so much with green energy, and to my knowledge, that is not really predicated on nuclear power. Now it almost feels irrelevant. Now it's like, well, let's just all kind of embrace the other stuff that we know works, and like that's going to be way easier and cheaper and have a lot fewer negative externalities. So I've like wrapped all the way back around to I don't think I like nuclear power anymore because I don't think we need it. I think there's easier ways to do it more safely.
Yeah. That's a very good explanation of sort of the journey I've been on with it. Like, yeah, there's just this resistance here where I'm thinking, like, this feels like not the right angle to combat this problem. And I think it feels a little outdated. But it's something I've cared about for a long time, is like the effect of nuclear radiation and the potential dangers of it, and particularly its use in weaponry. Like that's very important to me. It's been nice to read some stuff that's more lyrical. I think you and I have developed this is something I've come around on too over the years. Like I think we both developed a skepticism toward it as a method of writing.
Yes. I would say that there's a few people where you read them the first time and they have certain techniques, certain kind of literary technologies that are incredibly powerful on first exposure.
Yep.
And like, I think Eula Biss is the classic example of this, where the first time you read her, she blows you away with her little tiny fragments that you are supposed to kind of draw the connections between. And, you know, a lot of the work is happening in your brain in the negative space. And then you see it a few more times and it occurs to you, I'm actually doing almost everything here. And actually what I'm doing is not interesting, because if I had such cool ideas on this subject that I was able to do all of the work, I wouldn't be reading this at all. Like, it's not actually contributing almost anything. And she's an extreme case. Like, I really turned against her. Like, I think aesthetically she's kind of fascinating. She can be a lot of fun to read, but I don't think you're actually learning anything basically ever. And whether you care about that is, you know, nonfiction doesn't have to be eating your vegetables for learning's sake, right? But it does seem like you might as well learn something while you're there most of the time. And so I swung hard against it, but my heart is open to, like, obviously it should be a mode that exists, right? Like, obviously people should be exploring that space.
I think that I'm sort of on an upward pendulum swing with the whole genre, because for a while there it did feel like this feels like an ornate way of avoiding saying anything about a subject of importance. I do think, like you said, especially in undergrad writers, like this is a very powerful opening gambit to teach them the possibilities of language to imply and suggest sort of larger meanings, and especially like the technique of juxtaposing details, where you don't necessarily have to draw the connections between them, and doing that, just putting them next to each other, can be really powerful and more effective. So I think it's a super useful tool. And then the other side of that is, I think you sometimes see in young writers writing like an over-reliance on just stringing together observational details and never quite going anywhere else, and just delving deeper and deeper into observation. Right. But that said, I think I'm on an upward swing a little bit. Not necessarily because of this book, but because of the thing I'm working on sometimes dwells in that mode. And I'm trying to find the balance between a research-based approach and a lyrical approach. And one thing I've noticed with this book, with the Fukushima book, is like the author will sort of build around a particular fact. One of the essays sort of worked up to this detail, and I do think that working up to it makes it so much more affecting than if you just told people, like, this is what the sign outside Chernobyl says, outside the Chernobyl site. Condemned. This property is condemned for 500,000 years. Like, working up to that with evocative prose, to me, is just so much more effective than saying, that's what this sign says. It doesn't strike the same nerve
Yeah, well, we're so used to receiving I feel like by virtue of the amount of information that is available to you freely and the incentive to both provide provocative information and provide it in a provocative way so that people have no choice but to pay attention to you. It does take some prep, some laying the groundwork to ground you in a reality where you're able to hear something like that and actually experience more or less what you should experience when confronted with the idea of something like that, right? It is, because I feel like that's the kind of thing that you would also just randomly see in an Instagram post and then you'd scroll down to the next one.
So yeah, no, it's been a useful sort of technique study when working with material where the subject matter is heavy by its nature. In the thing I'm working on, the subject matter is not necessarily heavy by its nature, but it feels heavy to me. I'm talking about Godzilla.
Right.
And if I'm ever not talking about Godzilla, you can assume that I am talking about Godzilla.
Thinking about Godzilla as you speak.
Yeah, thinking of ways that the thing
unclear reference.
Right, yeah. It's always going back to Godzilla. So yeah, no, I'm trying to find a way to, in this project, explain, like, here's this very light thing by and large, which nonetheless to me feels extremely heavy.
I will talk briefly about what I've been reading, just because it's been a little bit of a subplot. It's been a cross podcast subplot between Tunnel Talk and this podcast, where various people are reading and grappling with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
This has come up a lot.
Yes. The conversation is, don't worry, it's going to be a little bit rough up front because there's not Jonathan Strange in it yet. It kind of feels like they're teasing you and delaying the reveal. And so I went in, I don't know if Ali said that it was like 50 pages or if I decided it had to be like 50 pages, because if you were going to say like, oh, just get over the hump, I figured that was like as long as the hump could be. But it's a long book. And so the hump is so long. So first you're with these boring nobodies who don't matter. And then they get introduced to a man who is extremely tedious, Mr. Norrell, but he can do magic. But for the most part, he refuses to do so. He's mostly gathering books. And he also stops the other guys from doing magic. He's like, if I can prove to you that I'm a magic guy, then you all have to stop being magic guys because I'm going to be the only magic guy. Huh. And they're like, all right. And he does it. And so then it's just him. And he's going around trying to position himself so he can get involved with the war against the French. But he is also like, nobody likes him. Everybody is like, this is the most tedious, condescending, arrogant dude on the planet. And for a long time, he can't even get involved in the war effort against the French. They won't even let him do it. They're like, magic is too embarrassing. Jonathan Strange still isn't there. Like, 4 hours pass in the audiobook that I'm listening to, and then Jonathan Strange is first mentioned in a footnote. I believe that is his introduction to the novel, is he is in a footnote.
Is it just like this guy also exists, or what's the footnote?
No, it's so weird. It's I think it's Mr. Norrell is doing a scrying spell where, you know, you look into a pool of water and you see an image from a distance and you're like gathering intel that way. And there's a footnote that says, Jonathan Strange also found that this spell was annoying later.
That's
which is
awesome.
Not useful information.
That's awesome. This book is brilliant.
Then you meet him, but the way that you meet him is this other guy shows up and he has a series of like minor misadventures in relationship to the obnoxious, unbearable father of Jonathan Strange, and he ultimately needs to bring him some liquor, and so he breaks into Jonathan Strange's room and sneaks the liquor out that he's hiding somewhere, or at least that's his intention. I don't remember if he does it. And Jonathan Strange is there but does nothing. He's just there watching. And the other guy doesn't even notice him. He sees him at the end and then he runs out, and that's your first scene with Jonathan Strange present, is him watching a man break into his room and then leave.
And you feel that these appearances don't reflect his importance in the text.
I don't know what they reflect. It's like, then it's several more chapters before he starts doing anything. And even then, it's positioned as like, well, Mr. Norrell doesn't like when other people do magic, so he's probably not going to want Jonathan Strange to do any magic, so he's probably going to reject him. So I don't know. He's probably not even going to be in the book anymore after that. And then finally they do meet up, and they it doesn't go that way. And I've spoiled tremendously this book, but I mean it's
that's okay with me.
I don't understand why it's like this. And maybe by the end I will. There's definitely like it casts a certain spell. Wink. It is a pastiche of other fiction of the time that it's set in, which is like the early 1800s. A big part of the importance of the mannered prose and story structure and characters is that when stuff starts to go crazy, it feels really crazy.
Yeah.
When the like fairy characters show up and magic starts happening, you freak out a little bit. But it is still, I imagine the editor reading this, deciding whether or not they were going to acquire and publish it. And like for the first 200 pages, they're like, obviously I'm not going to publish this. This is insane. And then they just keep going. And then by the end, they're like, not only am I going to publish this, but I'm not going to ask for the series of incredibly obvious revisions that anyone would ask for. So like, I'm curious to see why, like when I get to the end of this book, I'm looking forward to looking back and being like, yep, I wouldn't have changed that stuff either. Because right now that is almost unthinkable to me that you wouldn't trim like 100 pages.
Yeah, it feels like a kind of thing that has not existed for some time. And I kind of like that about it. Like that there's an extent to which, Moby-Dick is that way, where it's like, why did we need to get through all this to get to the boat? Are we even on the boat yet?
You know my depressing Moby-Dick story, right?
Probably.
I'll tell you this and then we'll see if it makes the edit. So I was listening to Moby-Dick because my theory was that if I listened to it, that would make it easier for me to get through it. Mm-hmm. And there's an extent to which that's true. But the beginning part is like you're saying, it is comparably long. And there was a moment hours in where I realized the boat had never left the dock. And I was positive. I was like, I was sure that at some point, because, with audiobooks, sometimes you don't pay attention, you realize later, like, oh, I missed an extremely important plot point. I just looked away for the chapter where that was happening. And I didn't notice them leaving the dock. And so I was talking to a coworker about this and saying like, I can't believe they haven't left the dock. And she was like, I'm actually reading it too. I had the same realization recently that they haven't even left the dock. Now this was back in October, and this was my colleague who had the terminal cancer. And so we never talked about Moby-Dick again, but she did die a few months later. I don't think Moby-Dick ever, what I was going to say is I don't think Moby-Dick left the dock. I don't think the ship left the dock in Moby-Dick for her. And every now and then I think about going back and like, I gotta finish this book.
Yeah.
I gotta get the ship out of the dock for both of us.
That's very sweet.
Yeah. It's like, it is that way for me too, where it's like, I'm never really in the mood to read Moby-Dick, but I do kind of feel like I should before I die.
Yeah, I think, here's my advice on that. I think that I was very resentful of this at the time, but I took a class on Melville during grad school to fulfill a requirement.
I resented that class as well.
Oh, yeah. No, it was so much reading, but we had to read Moby-Dick in like the space of a week, which, it was punishing. It was a punishing number of pages per day. I don't know. Maybe some people wouldn't find it that big of a lift, but at the time it was. So I was just like slamming through Moby-Dick as fast as I could while still, getting anything out of it, retaining any information. And I think maybe that's the way to do it, is to like give yourself an absurd deadline by which to finish Moby-Dick and then just like bury your head in it. So yeah,
Slam
maybe
that dick.
maybe you can, yes, maybe you can rent a boat. And that's the only thing you take with you. And you go on a week-long cruise by yourself, because I can't be there to distract you.
No.
You just have to spend the whole week reading Moby-Dick and nothing else.
You're trying to ruin boats for me, too.
I think you will remember and value that experience when you're done with it.
Okay.
Honestly.
Well, we'll look into boat rentals.
Moby-Dick is very good to have read.
And not just because of the thick gold bar of social capital that you mint as a result of having read it.
I am glad I read it. I think it was good to read. I like Melville. Moby-Dick is interesting. But yeah, I think you have to just sort of isolate yourself from other stimuli in order to get it done.